Bravo, bravo, Ed. Good morning, everyone. OMG, Ed, flowers, round of applause, encore. My name is Taisha Wilson, and I am the Director of Engagement at Philanthropy Together. Welcome back, philanthropists, for day 3 of We Give Summit. Whoop, whoop. We have had such an awesome time together over the past 2 days. And I am thrilled to be here. Our team is thrilled to be here. Thank you, Ed, for setting us up, getting us in the right mood to kick off day 3. Y'all, we have gotten a dose of inspiration on day 1, right? Day 2, we learned so much and rooted ourselves in deeper conversations on power sharing and equity. And today's sessions are all about our collective actions. So we'll explore new ways of doing things, right? We're gonna reimagine new ways how to collect our donations, tips on systems change to help all of us really think of new ways to drive our impact. So with that, I am beyond and super excited about this first interactive session to get us started for today. Podcasting 101, how to build local civic engagement during members' daily commutes, because who doesn't like a good podcast? And so this session will take us behind the scenes on podcasting as a civic engagement tool and how your giving circle can start one. So y'all, let's get out our pen, our paper. Let's get ready to engage, take some good notes. And a quick reminder is that we just ask that y'all stay on until the end for a very quick survey, a 2-question poll basically. And we're just gonna go ahead and jump into it. So with that, I am happy to hand it on over to Katy to get us started. Welcome on in, Katy.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited to be here and just really delighted by this platform, We Give Summit. What a fantastic way to connect caring, mission-minded people to do their work better. So thanks so much for having us. I do want to give a shout out to superfan Maggie Glasgow from Greenville, South Carolina, which is where I am also from, and for all the work she does to support great philanthropy, not just here, but around the country. So first, an introduction to who we are and why we're talking to you today. I'm Katy Smith, and I work with a group called the Greenville Partnership for Philanthropy, which is a network of philanthropic organizations in Greenville County, South Carolina. And we partner closely with our nonprofit alliance, so much so, in fact, that we're getting ready to merge. And so we thought we need to do something about civic engagement. And that is why we contracted with the Greenville Podcast Company. So let me hand it over to Nathaniel for an introduction.
Hello, everyone. I am Nathaniel. I am the founder of the Greenville Podcast Company. We produce podcasts in Greenville, South Carolina for companies, organizations, nonprofits, and around the U.S. and the world. So our focus is just podcasting. And then we partner with Katy, the GPP, and the NPA to make this podcast called Simple Civics Greenville County, which I will let Katy explain to you all.
Yeah, it feels like this is the third party that we need to introduce to you, which is our podcast. And just really quickly, this podcast, which we'll talk a lot more about the origins and the how-tos, is a local civics podcast that's focused on our community and on getting more people engaged in local government and local decision making. It drops once a week on Tuesday mornings. It's about 10 to 20 minutes long. So just quick, simple civics lessons for folks to consume wherever they are. And we'll get more into the details about it. But let's talk a little bit about what we hope you'll learn today. We want to leave you with ideas about how you can use podcasts to help you accomplish your mission. We are focused on civic engagement. So we'll talk about that if civic engagement is something you're interested in, if policy, advocacy, community organizing is an interest of yours, we'll tie into that because that's part of what we're doing in our work. But we also want to talk more broadly about thinking about podcasts for whatever your issue or mission are. You might be interested in arts, you might be interested in connecting local philanthropists or lifting up community members. We'll give you the how-tos around that too. And then kind of on the technical side of this, because in the end, it's a technical endeavor. We want to help you know the how-tos of those things, how to look for a production company or do it yourself. So hopefully you'll leave with good content on all of that. We want this to be interactive in the chat. So if you have questions, please pop them in there and we'll pull them up as we go through, but have abundant time for Q&A. We just have a lot of information we want to share with you. So we're going to kind of go through and let you take notes and then engage at the end if that suits everybody. So first, let me talk about our why. And our why is really captured in this picture. This is the Greenville County Council, the body that sets policy for our community, which is the largest by population county in South Carolina. There's two things I hope you note when you look at this body. These are 12 folks that have 12 single member districts. And in terms of demographics, in terms of their viewpoints, I know you don't see that when you look at them, they really don't fully represent who Greenville County is. We're a diverse community in demographics and attitude in so many different ways. And these 12 folks, many of whom have been on this body for a long time, don't necessarily cover the thoughts and beliefs of our whole community. And then you can look at those seats, which are empty, which is typically the case at a Greenville County Council meeting, or at least has been in the past. And so many of the things they are deciding deeply affect local people. We believe that local government is in so many ways much more important to people's daily lives than necessarily state or federal government. but no one's paying attention. So we wanted to change that. And we thought, how can we do that? That's how we got to the podcast. So there's a couple reasons we chose a podcast and why we think podcasting can be really important for you too. Number one, it has a much broader reach than the old meetings that we used to organize. And of course, we still have meetings. But if there's something we wanted people to know, we used to say, let's have a big event, print out name tags, buy some, salads or box lunches and teach everyone. Not everyone wants to do that, especially if it's a topic in which they're not already interested. We needed to reach them easily. Second, podcasts are so easy to consume. I'm an avid podcast fan. Listen to them all the time. We can get information out there so much more easily than we might have in an in-person event. And another thing is it positions us as a leader on this topic of local civics. And I'll talk more about that. But that's another outcome that we can get out there far more in the community. Another thing that's not reflected on this slide is it is just a way to connect really deeply with your audience and build a community. If you are a podcast listener, you probably feel like you know Ira Glass or John Favreau or whatever your favorite podcast is, like a friend that rides with you in the car every day. We wanted to build that sense of community too. So podcasting gives us a way to connect people, to inform and activate. But let's go a little bit more deeply into why you should consider podcasting. Nathaniel, I'll toss it to you.
So the first thing I want everyone to do is think of what you are doing when you listen to a podcast. For me, I listen to podcasts when I do things that I hate doing. So dishes, laundry, chores, things like that really aren't enjoyable. Yet podcasts are a way to make those really mundane things more enjoyable. So people generally get a lot of joy from listening to podcasts. And I have a stat here that 93% of people listen to over 60% of a podcast episode. And at first, you might not think that's a lot. They're only listening to 60% of an episode. Yet, take into account the average length of a podcast is an hour and a half. So listening to 60% is a decent amount of time. And then also compare it to something like YouTube. So we produce a YouTube show as well. It's pretty typical for people to only consume 10% of the content on every episode. So 60% in the entertainment industry is a pretty large number. So people really do genuinely enjoy podcasts and like listening to podcasts for many reasons. They're easy and they make boring things fun. Another thing is that you can reach more people with more information over a longer period of time. And for example, with Simple Civics, 95% of our audience is in Greenville County, South Carolina. But then you can also see on the statistics, we have people in Ireland who are listening. We have people in Germany and South America. We have people all over the world consuming this content. And that's a really cool thing because for all we know, someone in Oregon might be listening to Simple Civics and say, hey, that's a really cool system, or that's a really good thing that they do in Greenville County. Let's try to implement something similar where we live. So it's a great way to reach more people. And then another example I like to use is that, let's say you're hosting a live audience event. You might only have 50 to 100 people there, which is fantastic. But with a podcast, you might be able to reach thousands of people instead of those 50 peoples. And one last thing about reach is that in your local community, outside of huge cities like New York, Chicago, LA, it's likely that no one is actually making content for people in your community. And they're really wanting this content that's local, that's engaging. So it's very underserved. And this is a great way to reach those people who might want to hear more about their community. And I think Katy has an example of reach and how it plays in with Simple Civics, Greenville County.
Yeah, one thing that has been neat is how persistent the reach is. So when we first launched the podcast, we had a good listenership. We were delighted with how that first month was going. But what we've discovered is that someone might only discover it now after many months because someone that they knew or was interested in was a guest. And then they'll say, I'm going to go back and listen. So how many listens those first episodes continue to get is outstanding. We bring in new audience members and they go back and consume all the past information.
And then when it comes to branding, I think this is one of the most important things. And also, I'm going to quickly note for enjoyability and reach, those are Edison research studies. For branding, that this is a study from BBC, and for revenue, that's a study from eMarketer. So just so everyone knows the reputable sources that we're listing here. But for branding, podcasts are a great way to get your brand out, both in the community, but also with individuals. So you got to think, if people are enjoying your content, they're going to have a positive association with your brand, with your organization, or even if you're just an individual or a giving circle who wants to have a podcast. So it's a really great way to just have that positive association, because again, you're making things like dishes fun. You're making things like driving to work for an hour every day fun. So that's a great way to build your brand. You're also reaching more people than you would have. Again, if you had a live event, you might reach those 50 people, and then those 50 people know about, let's say, GPP or NPA. But if you can reach 1,000 people, that's 1,000 more people that now know of your brand or organization. And I think Katy has another example of how this plays in.
Yeah, as the podcast got more renowned and we had different guests on, we've had folks reach out to us. As an example, our county auditor, who's responsible for property taxes, as the property tax bill time came around, said, people don't really understand how this works. And I hear you have a podcast. And so he was a guest and talked folks through their property tax bill and how it works and how it goes to schools and what all of that means. So it has brought new folks into our audience who desire to connect with our brand for their own purposes.
And then the last thing on why you should consider, I titled it revenue, but it's really revenue and costs. So podcasts are a way to generate revenue for your brand. I don't want to say you're going to become a millionaire overnight podcasting, but if you do a local podcast in one of those underserved markets, well, it might be that a restaurant wants to sponsor a whole season of your podcast, and then that might cover the cost of production for your podcast. And you can continue getting out that great content because you're so locally focused. So a lot of these businesses around you and where you're at will say that actually is targeting directly who I need to target. I need exactly these people in my community, and that's who's listening to this. So that's a good way to bring in some revenue to at least maybe cover the cost of production. But then when it comes to costs, making a podcast and producing a podcast is going to be exponentially cheaper and more affordable than video production, for example, because there are more moving parts with video production. You need more control of the environment than you need with a podcast, right? You need lighting, like the ones that I have right now. You need a camera, hopefully a high quality camera. You need sound people. You need a director of sorts, a producer on top of that. So the costs really add up when you look at video production versus a podcast where we need 2 mics, 2 cords, and something to record it with. So it's much more affordable for you to get your message out through a podcast. And again, I think Katy has another example of how this is tied in with GPP.
Yeah, one thing we've really appreciated is how much effort there is putting on a special event, which I think is another common way that giving circles and organizations like ours get the word out. In the past, we would have rented the local community center, printed out the name tags, figured out table arrangements, and we still do that because in-person connection is very important, as I know you all know. But wow, not having to print a bunch of name tags and reach, exponentially more people with our information has been a great savings with a podcast.
And one thing I'm going to quickly add on top of what Katy just said was, we also we've produced podcasts for live events as well. And that's a great way. If you still want to have your live events and then reach people afterwards, you can still do that. So that's another great way, maybe combining the two into one. So just wanted to point that out. And then back over to Katy.
Yeah. So let me share with you some of the big things that we thought about when we thought maybe a podcast, the answer, to help frame some of your thinking. The first was this idea of know-how. Like I said, I'm an avid podcast listener, like self-improvement, true crime, religion, like the whole thing, politics. I love podcasts. So at first in my mind, we were going to be doing like This American Life, but in Greenville, or Pod Save Greenville, whatever you're listening to. I quickly learned that enjoying podcasts does not mean one is an expert at them. And so just that learning curve is not small, and that can help drive how you approach your production of a podcast. So that was one thing. The second thing was thinking about the quality. And there's 2 parts to the quality. There's the quality of the audio and the quality of the content. And both of them need attention paid to them. The content is, of course, what are you going to put out there? Is it interesting? Are your listeners going to stick with you? Are they going to tell a friend and share it and go back and listen to your previous episodes? And then how does it sound? They are not the same. And as Nathaniel put in the slide, if you can afford it, have both for sure. But if you can't have both, really prioritize your content. There is a really popular podcast in South Carolina that now has national follow called the Murdoch Murders Podcast. It's a really tragic situation, kind of a Southern Gothic crime issue that happened down in the lower part of the state. A local reporter started making this podcast at her dining room table with the worst vocal fry possible. It was a little difficult to listen to, but the content was so good, people kept coming back. And now it is sponsored by Outback Steakhouse and has a national listen. So content draws your audience, and then you can build your quality. Third thing we thought about was the commitment. It is a time commitment to put out a podcast if you're planning to do it week after week, multiple times a week, monthly, whatever it is. So really kind of build out your syllabus of what it is you want to share so you can make sure it has staying power. Or if you feel like you don't have that, then approach it like a Queen's Gambit. Is it going to be a couple episodes to get out an important message, and then you're done? People have something that they can go and listen to. And the last thing that we thought about, going back to my This American Life example, is realizing that you can have a journalistic style, which is what a very in-depth podcast is, or do a solo or an interview. Solo was what I thought about initially, where I might just be talking. That is not dynamic enough for me. I can't do that. There are some great podcasts that do that. That's not me. So interviewing was what we approached. You'll have to think through what approach makes sense for you if you decide to go about this. So let me hand it over to Nathaniel for some technical information.
So I'm aware that some people here are with large organizations that might be able to afford hiring a production company, and that's great. And we'll cover what to look for when you are hiring a production company in a moment. But some of you might just be giving circles, you might be individuals, or you might be smaller nonprofits who might not be able to afford a production company. So I wanted to quickly go over how you can do it yourself with a low budget. So 200 is the number I was aiming for with this. It might be around 10 over, but the first thing you're going to need is a decent quality microphone. There is a lot of bad information online when it comes to microphones. The best information I can tell you is to get the Audio-Technica AT2020 USB Plus. It comes with a stand, it comes with the microphone, and it plugs right into your computer. So you don't have to worry about, like right now, this one that Katy and I are using has a XLR cable, and you need to route it through a special interface and then into your computer. But with the Audio-Technica AT2020 USB Plus, you can just plug it straight into your computer and it is ready to go. So it's one less thing you have to get. And Audio-Technica is a really high quality company. The headphones Katy and I are using right now are by Audio-Technica, for example. Love them. They make great stuff. So that is a great microphone to get. And if you're having interviews, then grabbing 2 of those might be worth it. The next thing you're going to need is an audio host. So you need to find a place to host the actual audio files. You're going to be turning all the audio recording into an MP3. That has to go somewhere. When someone presses play on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, whatever it is, it needs to have a way of communicating, pull this audio file. And for the most part, it's not free. But the good news is that there's a website that I like to use called Libsyn, Liberated Syndication, and they have a base plan that's $5 a month, and it covers your audio hosting needs, and you can link it up with all the podcast directories. They've been the longest player in the game. They've hosted some of the largest podcasts. They used to have Joe Rogan as an example and Tim Ferriss for audio hosting. So they've had really big names in the industry. They're a reliable, publicly traded company, so you're not going to get scammed or anything. And then one thing I'll say about audio hosting, if they say it's free, please avoid it. I know it's very tempting to do the free option, but what actually happens is most likely they will have a clause that says they technically own the content. Now, we haven't seen a situation yet where an audio host has actually just taken your content and said, too bad, you're out of luck, but it's there. The possibility is there. Which is why I always say go for Libsyn, because it's affordable, $5 a month, and you have a partner that you can trust, and they're there to help you. They have great support. The next thing you're going to need is software to edit the actual audio content for. Now, I'm going to recommend you avoid things like equalizing your audio and compressing it, just because that's not worth your time right now. If you're just starting, sometimes it's better to learn, is this even a medium that works for the content that we're trying to make? And Audacity is a great software just to quickly edit everything for, and it's completely free. And because it's free, there are a wealth of tutorials on YouTube on how to use it. So you can really pick up this great software and just learn how to edit within a day and then have it going. And then the last thing you need to consider with the pricing is your time, right? Do you have the time to learn everything that goes into producing a podcast? And do you have the time every week to do that yourself? Or is that something where you should look at a production company for? So that's how you can do it yourself. And I'm just going to point out all of these slides are available after the fact. So you can come back and find this list if you do decide to do it yourself. And if you Google my company, my email's there. You're welcome to email me for help, and I will get you set with everything that you need to do it yourself if that's the direction you choose to go. But I want to quickly talk about cover art, because this is the one thing I think you should actually splurge on if you have the money. Cover art is very important. So when you're thinking about podcasting, the first thing people see is the cover art. The next thing they see is the title of the episode. So you have seconds to basically tell those people, this is what the podcast is about. This is what you're getting. You do not want to waste those few seconds and have cover art that doesn't relay the message of the podcast. So I have some examples here. The one on the left, these are all things that the Greenville Podcast Company designed for our clients. But the one on the left is a horse racing podcast. And I think that's very obvious when you see the jockey on a horse there. The one on the right, TikTok trends, I think very well relays the message that this is about TikTok. It's a phone, someone's holding it, it says TikTok, great. And then the middle one, it might not be as obvious, Simple Civics. It might not be obvious to people here who don't live in Greenville. But if you live in Greenville and you see the mountains and you see the iconic bridge there, you know immediately that this is a podcast about Greenville County, a place where I live and a place where I love, right? So it's really important for cover art to tell people exactly what they're getting from a podcast. So spend a lot of time making this as good as you can. And one thing I will note, unless you're a celebrity, do not use your face on a podcast. I know it's very tempting. I know it is, but people are going to see it and be like, who is this? And it doesn't relay the message. So try to really get accurate with that podcast cover art. And now we're going to move on for things to look for if you're hiring a production company. And I want to preface this by saying podcasting is very hot right now. It's very in, and it's growing incredibly fast. So with that comes a lot of scam artists, a lot of people who just basically want to take your money and not actually give you good services. So if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. So be very hesitant of some of the companies that you talk to, because a lot of them are there just to make a quick buck, and they're not going to be good partners for your production. So the first thing you want to take into account is the audio recording and video recording if you're going to make this a video podcast. So are they going to come to you to record, or will you have to go to them to record? Are they using high quality microphones, or are they using microphones more like the DIY ones? Not that those are bad. Those are really good if you are doing it remote, which is another thing to consider. If they're not in your city, do they ship you equipment, and then do they record it with you? And I will say, if you are working with a production company doing it all remote and the recordings are on Zoom, that is not a reliable production company for podcasting, because Zoom really messes with audio. It's great. It's perfect for things like this, like what we're doing right now. But when it comes to high quality, high fidelity audio, you're going to want to use something like Zencaster, for example, which tries to record in the best quality possible. And it does a really good job. We have a few clients, for example, we do that for, and no one can really tell that it's done all remotely, which is great. But if you do it on Zoom, it's going to have that Zoom sound, and that's not pleasant to the ears. So you're going to see how they record it. And the next important thing, probably the most important thing, are they going to edit your audio, and will they master and equalize and mix your audio? Now, I'm not going to get too nerdy and technical on this one for the sake of time, and so I don't bore everyone. But if you look at these slides after the fact, I actually have some quizzes that you can give these production companies when it relates to audio engineering and editing, because there are a few critical and crucial questions you can ask about things like compression and audio standards that if they don't know the answer to, and if they don't have the right answer, then they do not know what they're talking about, and they should not be a production company that you go with. The next thing, not as important, but very nice to be included if they do it, cover art and website. Do they provide high quality cover art? Now, what I recommend is look at their portfolio. And if the cover art does not wow you, it is not going to wow the audience. So it's really important if they provide cover art for you to see what they've done in the past and what it's going to look like. And then for some production companies, they also offer making a website. Again, it's not necessarily important. A lot of people prefer putting the podcast on their company's website or their individual's website, but some people do prefer having a dedicated website just for the podcast, like Simple Civics Greenville County has that. And it's a great way to share just the podcast and no other information besides what you're talking about on the podcast. And then you also want to consider, are they taking care of getting the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, all 150 plus podcast apps? Are they publishing the content for you, and are they distributing the content for you? That's very important, because you don't want a production company to just make the audio and send it to you, and then all of a sudden you don't really know what to do with it. So look for someone who will also cover distribution of the content. And then you're also going to want to know your statistics. That's really important. You're going to want a production company to share your monthly, weekly, daily stats with you in a way that you understand. So do they share those stats? And then the last thing I'll say about what to look for when hiring a production company, you're going to want someone who's going to be a good partner for you. For example, with Katy and GPP, my degree was in politics and international affairs. I happened to be a podcast production company, right? But it was a good fit. I know politics, and this is related to politics. So not only could we do the production side of things, but we were also a partner in terms of, how does the content sound? Is this a good idea? Do we like this episode? So it's really important. Hire someone that you're going to get along with, because, and Katy can attest to this, you're going to spend hours with this person producing podcasts for what could be years, for all you know, months, years. So make sure it's a good partner that you have. Katy, I don't know if you have anything to add to this, because you did hire a production company. So if you have anything to add, now is your chance.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think if you are totally new to this, your head might be spinning a little bit. Just begin to go down the road and you'll figure out what makes sense for you. You know, you yourself might not have the DIY in you, but there might be someone else in your giving circle who is really interested to learn more, or has a little bit of experience and can take it and run with it, because there are thousands of DIY podcasts out there that, you know, are doing great and serving their own audience's need. Or you might figure out, we need a little bit more help, and we want to get some grant dollars together or sponsorships to pay for that. And I'll talk more about the funding of that in a little bit. It's been a really great help for Nathaniel, since I'm a part-time staff person, to have him involved in this and bring expertise to us. So I think if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk through this, really focusing on our civic engagement as an example. So you can take what I'm about to share. If you are interested in something totally different than civic engagement, it'll give you ideas for your issue. But if civics is what you're interested in too, hopefully you can build on this. So as we got started, and our goal was to help our community members be more engaged in local government, we established an advocacy committee. And that advocacy committee said, what's kind of the syllabus of local civics that we would create? And we just brainstormed things like, how does local government work? What is redistricting? How do I engage with an elected official? How do I speak at a meeting? What does our mayor think about this or that? So we just brainstormed a list. So this is the same thing I would advise for you, is just generate what is your menu of episode content, at least to get you started. We focused on a season, and we just completely made up that our first season was 16 episodes. So we said, let's give it 16 episodes and see how it goes. Then we had to think of, all right, who is the person that can address each of these topics that we could interview? We use the word legitimacy. It's really kind of like, who's the credible source of information? And we matched up names with each of those topics. We wanted our government affairs person from Greenville County to come and talk about local civics. We wanted the League of Women Voters to come and talk about voting. We wanted our Chamber of Commerce to talk about the connection between the social sector, which is what we represent, and economic development. So we built that list of prospects to help address each of these topics. And then we thought a little bit about those prospects and their communication style. We have learned that this is really important over time because in essence, people are going to be talking into someone's ear while they're washing dishes, as Nathaniel said. And if it is someone who's super low energy or very wordy or, it's just a little hard to listen to that. So we've figured out that sometimes you need to think very carefully about that match and then have a practice conversation with them to help prepare them and warm them up a little bit once they get in the room. I'm sure people who have a role in media know all of these things, and this is like regular practice. If you're bringing someone on the Today Show, that is not me. So we've kind of learned that as we have gone. And then thinking about the schedule, there's like a kind of practical side to this scheduling point that I want to share, but this is a little bit where the magic happens too in this endeavor. For us, we thought, all right, what if we once a month have a day that is podcasting day, and Nathaniel comes and sets up the equipment in my office. And if you're doing it DIY, you're going to have to get all of this stuff out and set it up in your dining room or wherever you're doing it. We pick our day and then we schedule our guests on that day and we bring them in hour slots. The podcast that results is only 10 to 15 minutes. And so there's not dead time. There is time where we can sit and just have a conversation. And so the relationships that I have been able to build with these government officials or elected officials or community activists has been really, really special. And that's been an outcome of this that we hadn't really thought about. But you're going to need to think through what's the most convenient way for you to get this done and keep the train moving once you've decided to launch a podcast. And then lastly, thinking about content promotion, which if you think about strategic communications and this is your field, like this is an obvious point. Again, not my field. I mean, my background's in social work, but we've had to think about, all right, how are we going to make this easy to get the word out? And so we have a Google sheet that a couple of us shares that we put in the descriptions, we put in the hashtags, we put in links to the guests, LinkedIn and the like, and we have an intern who helps get that information out for us on social media. If you are a volunteer-driven organization, this is a great way to engage your network in helping you share information with all of their audiences and friends and connections on their social media. So next, we just like to give you guys a checklist of things to think about, and we'll elaborate a little bit on this just to help you with some of the things that we've learned. Just to recap, obviously, the what is my why is the most important thing for any project you're going to engage in. But really, this is a strategic communications tool. And so I think giving circles, you might say, we want to lift up members, which is great. Like, what is it that you're really wanting to change in your listeners' thinking upon hearing this? So, thinking about all of the parties or messages or things you want to lift up, just thinking about what's the message we want to get out and how do we convey that in the podcast. The second obvious thing, thinking of strategic communications, is who is your audience? If it is just the members of your giving circle, that's a wonderful family that you have, and you can communicate with them in a certain tone versus is it your region? Is it your grantees that you're wanting to build up? So thinking about your audience and kind of the content and tone that you set with that. What form and length? Oh, so Nathaniel, you're going to chime in?
No, I was just going to cover form and length because it's very much ties in with the production side of things. So depending what you want from your podcast, it's going to take either more time or cost more to do. So if you want it to be more journalistic, more really polished, like the Gimlet Media, great example. They do great journalistic podcasts. That's going to take a lot more time than something like a very casual interview or something more laid back, or it could even be one person. But also when it comes to the length, you have to consider that if you're doing it yourself, a 15-minute podcast will be much easier to edit than an hour-long podcast. If you are hiring a production company, a 15-minute podcast might be more affordable than an hour-long podcast. And back to doing it yourself, you also have to realize the end product, if you're doing a 15-minute podcast, might be 15 minutes long, but don't be surprised if that's actually 30 minutes of raw audio that you're going to have to edit through and turn into 15 minutes. So the same goes if you're doing an hour-long podcast. You might actually have 2 hours of raw recording that you're going to have to go through and trim down. And all of that takes time and energy. So really nailing your form and how long you want them to be is important. Katie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no. I think, to that point, thinking about the responsibility, hopefully we've covered a little bit about all the pieces and parts of this. So just figuring out who's in charge of this project and who are the other parties they need to bring in. If you're a volunteer-driven organization and you have people that are willing and interested in doing this, this can be a great way to engage them in a project that they might not have been able to raise their hands for otherwise. Regarding frequency that Nathaniel's going to touch on, we had a question from Amy, who asked, is there any best practice around frequency? How should folks approach this and knowing how often to release?
Best practice is be consistent. Be consistent. If you publish on a Tuesday, make sure it's a Tuesday every single time you are releasing that podcast episode, because otherwise you'll confuse your audience and you might lose your audience as a result. So consistency is key when it comes to that. Surprisingly, if you do it weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, that's not quite as important. So just be consistent with what you do. So great question regarding that. And to talk about frequency, I like doing podcasts weekly. I think personally for me, it's the most enjoyable because especially for those podcasts I really want that content and I want it now. So weekly is great for me. But if you're doing it yourself, or even if you're hiring a production company, you might be able to turn 16 episodes into 32 weeks rather than 16 weeks. So maybe you do it bi-weekly and then you have more time to edit it. Or instead of paying a production company for 16 weeks, now you're paying them every 32 weeks, for example. So that's in regards to frequency. And then production responsibility, who's doing the production? Are you doing it yourself? Or are you going to hire a production company? That one's pretty self-explanatory.
Marketing, we covered that, but just think through, is there a website for it? Where are you going to post the episodes? How are you going to get it out on social media? But expectations is something to get clear on. So, if you've been successful and realize that you might have other expectations that you're meeting or falling short on. We had the standard thing about downloads. We figured if we had an in-person meeting, 100 people would come. So if we have something more than that, that would be great. We laughed at that commercial, like we have tens and tens of views. We didn't have a huge number because we're talking about Greenville, South Carolina, but we've been delighted to exceed those. But the other things that we've been so thrilled with are just new relationships in the community, more recognition that we've gotten, an ability to elevate leaders. It's just been really, really wonderful. So that's been really helpful. Nathaniel, anything on that?
Yeah, I feel like it's really important to nail this home. If you're not podcasting, if your end goal isn't to make money, then downloads really aren't the most important thing to look at. It's great. It feels really good when people listen to your stuff. I get that. But what's more important are those people coming back, and are you getting quality feedback from the people listening? I think that's more important for the success than anything else, because you could have 10,000 people listening, and if they're never saying they love it, then, well, you've no idea if they like it. Whereas if you have maybe 100 people listening, but those 100 people are super fans and they're contacting you and they're loving what you do, that to me is a great metric for success. And I think that really should be the mindset shift that a lot of you take into account. So what's the feedback? How's the quality? Are people enjoying it? That's going to be more important to you than the downloads you're getting. And if you do get a lot of the downloads, though, that's awesome. So it's nice when you do get them.
And the last thing is just the time. How much time can you dedicate that to this? And this is something that only you can evaluate. Before we get into a couple of examples, I do want to lift up, if you're thinking like, this sounds kind of expensive or costly, and we're a small giving circle, how can we fund this? There are lots of different ways, and you've heard the price points are varied. One thing I'll share about what we did is we put in our own dollars first to get this started and see what would happen. And we approached it as an experiment. And then as we were able to gather data of actual downloads and listens, visits to the website, and just new relationships, we were able to use that to build a sponsorship opportunity. And so we have a local entity that is a member of our giving circle. It's an organization, is sponsoring this season. We kind of came up with a price tag that matches the actual cost of Nathaniel's time, and they now get a blurb at the beginning of every episode. I'm realizing that as we're doing more of this and our brand is growing, the opportunities for sponsorship for this have grown too. It's not a huge amount of money. It's not Outback Steakhouse, but it's great for us and it helps us get the word out. So I think you can get grant dollars if you're lifting up topics that are of real interest in your community to local grant makers. There's a lot of ways to slice and dice it. And I think we haven't even fully tapped into those opportunities. So let me share a couple of examples with you as inspiration for you, hopefully. As I mentioned, we had kind of the basic local civics topics that we knew we wanted to cover, and we brought in guests like the League of Women Voters, people from our county, others to talk about this. We've had some guests like Hisha Gamble, who is our next example. She is let me have to read her title, Assistant County Administrator for Engineering and Public Works. We wanted to bring Hisha on to, number one, introduce folks to people who they might consider bureaucrats, but who are real, live, awesome people, which Hisha is an awesome person. So we wanted to just connect them with the staff in local government and then help them understand more about how do roads work, because our road system is not great in Greenville County. And people probably are pointing their finger at Hisha's department. It has a lot to do with the choices that our county council is making about how we fund operations in our community. And Hisha was able to shine a light on that in a very appropriate way, given her role. It was also a great atta girl for Hisha. She is working her fanny off, and this was a great way to say, you are worthy of lifting up. You are doing amazing things, and kind of lift her up to her platform of folks. So Hisha was a great example. Another one that we had of guests was our county sheriff and our city police chief, who we had on together to talk about law enforcement. They both came into their roles in 2020. So to talk about what that meant and the racial reckoning that's happening around the country and how it's played out here, that has brought in a whole new audience of listeners, people who aren't really interested in what we do and our mission, but who are interested in law enforcement. They heard them and they said, man, this must be a trusted resource for information in our community. So we've brought them in. And then the last example that I'll share, and then we'll move to any questions, is Taquita Wallace, who is a community activist and organizer, although she probably did not consider herself this. She is just someone I saw in the small audience at every county council meeting who was getting up and speaking, who was sharing information with her neighbors on Facebook. And we said, you deserve lifting up. So she came in and talked about her journey to become a community activist. And it helped others understand what this looks like. And it helped affirm Taquita's role in the community. And now she kind of shows up in a different way because she's been given this platform. People are delighted to be on a podcast. That is the number one reaction that people have. They take off their headphones and they say, that was really fun. And there are so many people that you can lift up if you decide to do a podcast and build your audience and build relationships. And I really appreciate all the comments that Taisha's put in here about, yeah, this develops your culture. It develops your voice. I saw the question about, is it customary to pay podcast guests? This is not something that we have done with this project. I have done other video projects in which we've brought in community members and we have compensated them for their time, but that's not something that we have done. It hasn't made sense for what we're doing, but definitely it's something worth exploring, depending on how much time your work takes. So I think that's it for what we wanted to share with you all, but we would be delighted to take any questions if you want to put them in the chat, if you want to unmute. Nathaniel, anything else from you before we move on to that?
Nothing in particular. I know I threw a lot of technical information your way, so definitely go back and review these slides and review some of the speaker notes that I put in the technical slides, because they'll be helpful for that and it'll explain it in a little bit more detail than I could get in today. But the only comment I'll add is that I've loved working on Simple Civics Greenville County. It has been fantastic. I feel more connected to the community as a result, as a listener of the podcast, not just as the producer of it. And it's very cool to see the community start listening to it and react to it. I have friends who've never cared about, what's going on in Greenville County, who all of a sudden are talking about county council with me at a bar. And I'm like, what? Who is this person? And it's all because they started listening to Simple Civics Greenville County. So these podcasts can be a great tool to really engage and make a difference in your community, which ultimately, I think that's why we're all here. So that's the only comment I'll add. But if anyone has any questions, Katy and I are willing to answer anything.
I know we are just about at time. And let's see here, Amy, thanks for your question. How can you record content at public events on the fly? Nathaniel just did that, and maybe you could offer yourself offline too, but what would you give as an overview?
It is very difficult to do. It depends. Are there going to be microphones that come out of a loudspeaker? Because if so, you kind of just have to hope that the system they're using provides recording to you. I was lucky. I just did one literally last week, where it was all recorded onto a CD. This system was older than I am, and I'm not exaggerating by that. I got this CD. I'm like, what do I do with this? I don't even have a CD player. So it really depends. If there isn't a loudspeaker system and it's just a room where people can hear each other, then just bring a mic and then a recorder. I have this thing called a Zoom PodTrack P4 that I'm using right now. It records. It's very good for that. So just put a microphone in front of whoever's speaking, hit record, and then you're good to go. And yeah, I can, if you want to message me afterwards, I can explain in more detail because there's some more technicalities behind that.
Yeah, both of us are here for you. So don't hesitate to reach out. We just are so pleased with what our experience has been in so many ways. And so we'd love to help you. I know we're just about at time. Maggie Glasgow, super fan. Is there anything you would like to say as a Giving Circle member here in our community?
I would just love to say that this has been fantastic in Greenville County because we have had a lot of local political issues during the pandemic and now coming up with redistricting and just tons of stuff. And I know this is happening in every community across the country. So Katy has such a way about her that she can present these things in a way that will get people on both sides to listen and to engage and to really think about them deeply. And I think it's going to make a big difference in our upcoming local elections. And I'm really, really happy that she got to present this here because this is important work.
Thank you, Maggie. And one thing I'll say to y'all is I don't necessarily appear on every podcast. Sometimes we have one of our members interview one of these folks who we have as guests. So if you are interested in engaging your giving circle and have, if you're interested in civic engagement, have a member interview the police chief, have a member interview the school superintendent, have a member interview an activist. And then you kind of accomplish so much all at once. So really excited. Hope you guys run with this, and we stand here to help you, because if we don't get folks interested and engaged, I shouldn't frame it in the negative. We're going to get folks interested and engaged and save the world with our dollars and our time and our voices.
Yes, Katy, what a wonderful way to close. I 100% agree, and great. Thank you all so very much for sharing for just this very insightful and important conversation about podcasting and how we can start one as Giving Circle members. I hope that you all are inspired. I know I am, or will consider a podcast to really tell the story of your circle, right? And to drive engagement in your community. And to Katy's point, to drive civic engagement, y'all. As we know, local turnout at elections is low, oftentimes than the national ones. And so this is a great way for how we can have that conversation and bring in our government officials, your circle members, your grantees. So pop the lid off and really digest the information that Katy and Nathaniel have shared. And Katy and Nathaniel, thank you all again. Best of luck and continued growth to you all with your civic, Simple Civics Greenville County podcast. Before we wrap up, the poll is about to come up. There it is right there. Please, please, please answer our 2-question poll before you leave. It's very helpful with us with future programming. And also in a couple of days, the recording will be available, as well as we'll share that slide deck that Nathaniel and Katy shared. And really just thank you all again for joining us. I hope you'll stay on for our next session. It's rocket fuel for your giving circle, transformational gifts from high net worth donors, starting at 11 a.m. That's Eastern Standard Time. So take a water break and come on, and we'll see you all in a little bit. Thank you.